I'm sure you've seen posters or memes of how a process or perception is like an iceberg. The visible part above the surface is only a small piece of a much larger reality. Well, it's also a great analogy to a well-designed customer experience.
When we designed the Performance Innovation Lab, we did it with a look at an 80-20 approach. What are the things that we can do to really make big change, not strive for perfection?
Let's look at how one of the largest banks in the U.S. creates a seamless experience on this episode of the CX Leader Podcast.
The CX Leader Podcast with Steve Walker is produced by Walker, an experience management firm that helps our clients accelerate their XM success. You can find out more at walkerinfo.com.
Hello, everyone. I'm Steve Walker, host of the CX Leader Podcast, and thank you for listening. As we like to say on the show, it's never been a better time to be a CX leader, and we explore the topics and themes to help leaders like you deliver amazing experiences for your customers. Creating seamless experiences is one of the many goals of CX pros. But what should be perceived by the customer as a smooth experience can sometimes create complicated processes for the company, that hidden part of the iceberg. But if it's done right, it can benefit both the customer and the employees. And we have a guest on our show this week who heads up a unique program on how to make that happen. Andy Netzel is a CCXP and the head of the Performance Innovation Lab at KeyBank. Andy, thanks for being a guest on the CX Leader Podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, Steve.
Hey, it's my pleasure too, and really appreciate you coming on. One of the things I always like to do on this podcast is just get a quick background on you and how you made it to become a CX pro. I know most of us didn't start out to be that, but just give us a quick rundown on your journey to your current position, and then we'll get into the topic of the podcast.
Yeah, sure thing. So actually started out as a journalist, doing both writing and on radio. And as the journalism field started to disappear, I got into marketing. But I didn't really know what marketing was because, I come from a journalism background. So ultimately, I just started looking at, hey, if we're going to sell more stuff, let's create the environment to sell it in an interesting way. So that kind of led to me doing client experience type work as a marketer. And eventually I just gave up on the whole marketing title and aimed for shaping experiences that our clients go through.
And how long you been at Key?
Just about 5 years.
5 years, but did you start in marketing and then emerge into the CX space?
No, I started off as the sole person in this department, and now we got a big one.
Cool. Were you doing CX before you got to Key then?
Yes, but again, never with a CX title, more with marketing titles.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I actually had a guest on the show just a few weeks ago that was a PhD in communications. So that may be just another more maturing of our industry profession is that, and obviously I've always said that marketing is kind of the closest thing I think to customer experience because it has to be pervasive. It's not, it typically is a department, but it's so cross-functional. It's got to be involved in everything. And particularly in complex, B2B plus B2C services like financial services, the experience can't really be separated much from the brand. So I think the tie into marketing and your background makes a lot of sense. So tell me a little bit about the Performance Innovation Lab and how that came about. How does that fit into the kind of the overall vision that Key has for CX?
Yeah, well, sometimes the phrase customer experience, it can sound a little squishy. So we wanted our name to really reflect the culture. And it took a few years to come up with something that made sense. But we really focus on being practical, being pragmatic, and having a focus on just getting things done. So when we designed the Performance Innovation Lab, we did it with a look at an 80-20 approach. What are the things that we can do to really make big change, not strive for perfection? We rely a lot on pilots with a thought of failure is okay. We want to be willing to try things, willing to stretch ourselves. And truly in the end, we focus on trying to look at the holistic experience. So everything from what our clients' employees are saying, those transformations that we put out, making sure that change is adopted and accepted and de-risked, and then communicating both to our clients and employees what's changed and what that looks like.
Yeah, it sounds like, back to your opening comment, it sounds very pragmatic and practical, kind of like an agile type of approach where you're iterating. And one thing you said is beautiful. I love this, progress over perfection any day of the week. As long as you're making progress, you're moving in the right direction, things are probably doing pretty good. And then I love the concept of the 80-20 chart, Pareto chart. Actually, historically, I've been in the business a long time, but a lot of this goes back to some of the Six Sigma total quality improvement type initiatives where we were kind of looking for the 20% activities that could generate 80% of the results. So I really like that approach that you've taken, and it sounds very, very practical.
Yeah, I always joke that we don't move at bank speed in my department. And I think a big part of that is if you make those big plans and want everything to run exactly perfect, you're just never going to get that stuff off the ground. So, we know we're going to mess up. Let's get it out there. Let's see how it goes, and we can iterate.
Yeah, and you said that you joined the bank 5 years ago specifically for this function. How'd you get this thing started? What was kind of your first step in this process?
Yeah, well, so it all starts with collecting that feedback first, right? So we stood up some client feedback points, a relationship study, which I always see as kind of the canary in the coal mine. You can start to see the trends, but you don't necessarily know what's causing them.
Mm-hmm.
And then we looked at onboarding and servicing as two big moments of truth. And then, beyond the clients, then we also started talking to our employees. And, of course, we stood up your traditional online forums and group mailboxes and all of that. But generally, I don't think, a suggestion box isn't going to get you to, hey, here's everything that we need to go fix. So we did a lot of targeted questioning and kind of scrutiny of the business as well, journey mapping, workshops, focus conversations, and a big focus on, I don't care how the information gets to me. If there's good stuff, doesn't matter if I'm in a meeting and I hear it there, if I hear it in the hallway, if someone sends an email, I'm going to make sure that all gets into our prioritization funnel.
Yeah. I love that approach. You mentioned the journey mapping. Was that something that you undertook pretty early on?
Yeah. I journey mapping was something like 2 weeks in. They're like, okay, we want to do a massive journey mapping. We're going to invite all of the executives, and we want to look holistically at our entire onboarding process because we know we want to blow that up. So get planning. And at this point, it was like, wow, I'm still trying to figure out what's going on. But it was such a great introduction to the organization because I got to meet so many different passionate people across the business. And also, if I was going to host the kind of journey mappings I like to do, I had to figure out everyone who's involved that touches all of this stuff. So I had the right people at the table. So, we ended up, I pulled in several different groups, and we spent, I think it was 2.5 days going through and building out some of our first journey maps that had ever been done at the bank.
And are you across all aspects of the bank, B2C and B2B, or are you more focused on the retail or the commercial side?
Yeah, our focus in the Performance Innovation Labs on our business clients. So we're really focusing in on just the B2B side of the bank.
Okay. So commercial lending, treasury.
Really focused on payments and treasury is our main area, but nothing stays in a box, right? Like anything you touch, it's going to cross silos. So we work with groups all over the bank.
Yeah. One of the things we talked about was this iceberg analogy, and you've built this really robust program, with both customers and employees. And obviously you got top level buy-in and kind of all the things that we would always look for. But let's go back to the iceberg analogy. And can you give us a couple of examples of where you were able to kind of make things more seamless to the customer without really exposing all the ways the sausage got made?
Yeah, sure. One of our first big projects was really tied around the onboarding experience. And what we realized or recognized pretty early on was we had clients that valued different things. Some folks really wanted to get things up and running quickly, so they valued kind of time or speed to market. Other ones, this was a big change. They're changing the way they operate their business, and they want to make sure that they feel safe. So they want a very deliberate project plan. They want hand-holding as you work through, and they want to leverage you as a true advisor. So one of the early things that we needed to do was a bunch of data analysis to understand what do those different clients look like? So if we're going to create two different experiences and put people through different paths in order to get onboarded, who values time and who values white glove service? So we kind of dissected the feedback that was coming in, looked at it by client type, looked at it by the different types of products that were being onboarded. And we eventually came up with kind of two paths, an expedited process and a white glove process. And we were able to kind of direct the clients to the right path. But we also made sure that we stayed flexible in, we're a relationship bank. So whether it's the relationship manager or one of our payments advisors, if they said, hey, I know my client, this is what they value, we could call an audible and make sure it goes to the other team.
I think that's great because, sometimes sometimes they're following the process that's been designed and you're sort of like, okay, yeah, let's get on with this a little bit more. So it sounds like you might have used some persona type work there too, right?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. We built out personas when we did our journey mapping, and we were totally off in terms of
really?
how to actually break the clients down for our end solution. So how we think about our clients from a sales perspective was totally different from how we needed to think about them from an onboarding perspective to get them feeling good about their experience. I'm a small business person, so I have had bank relationships for my business. And then I actually, about 10 years ago, got to go on the board of a pretty nice sized regional bank in Indiana. So I am very aware of the regulatory environment and some of the limitations that places on the customer experience. How do you feed that into your overall process and program? And I'm sure there's a lot of concern that you got to stay right with the regulators, right? Well, of course. So risk is such an important part of everything that we do. I think back to past places where I've worked, and we've been a product-led company or we've been a marketing-led company. At a bank, I don't think you can be anything but a risk-driven company. So it really goes back to some of our core. At past companies I've worked at, there's always a resistance to change. It was, we've always done it this way. That's totally not true at Key. But at Key, the resistance comes from, have we really thought through this? Are we sure there's no unintended consequences? It's really thinking about, what is that ultimate action going to do? And is that action, is there any chance whatsoever that one of our clients is going to be able to make, push through their payroll for the week? That would be devastating, right? Are they not going to be able to pay off their loan balance? Is something that we're going to do going to impact that client from their regular business operations? So we do a ton of validation. Anytime I think we're onto it, we figured out the idea, I walk around, I go on a road show to get beat up. I throw out things and say, hey, what could possibly go wrong with this? What's happening here? And then I hand off. I have someone on my team who does change management, and she loves to do a pre-mortem. So kind of like a post-mortem, but you're thinking ahead of time. What's everything that could have gone wrong? And if that did go wrong, if we figured out what we're going to do about it. So really just beating everything up. And then lastly, pilots, right? So anything that we can possibly pilot ahead of time, we want to do that, suss it out, see if anything happens that we weren't expecting, or if we realize any of the problems that we did expect to happen and did those mitigations work.
I love pre-mortem. I'm going to use that. I'm stealing that one from you. I'll try to give you credit for that, Andy, next time I use it. But that, what you've really figured out, part of the secret here is that you need to be kind of paranoid about stuff, right? You can't just want to change. You almost have to be looking for change to implement it, don't you?
So I mentioned my background as a journalist. One of my favorite journalism professors back in college used to say, if your mother says she loves you, check it out. And that is something I repeat a lot here at Key. I take nothing for granted. Question everything, even the thing that seems like the most basic thing that you can trust. Go validate that.
Yeah, I bet your mother does love you, though. So
pretty great. Love you, Mom.
Remember the CX Now series we just wrapped up not too long ago here on the CX Leader podcast? Well, we just published a new ebook highlighting each of the essential themes driving CX. You can download it at walkerinfo.com/CXNow. And don't forget about our blog. That's right, we have a blog and we update it regularly. Check it out at walkerinfo.com/blog. There's a ton of great experience management content available, and the best part, it's free. That's walkerinfo.com/blog. Hey, my guest on the program this week is Andy Netzel. He's a CCXP, and he's the head of the Performance Innovation Lab at KeyBank, which is a really, if you've been listening to this podcast, he's really got kind of a unique approach to how they focus on CX, and I'm just really intrigued with it. So you mentioned you had one person on your team. I assume you don't have a huge staff, right? You're pretty cross-functional?
Yeah, well, between the different groups, we've got about 16 people.
Oh, okay. It is a big size group. But so you've talked a lot about kind of the impact you're making on change and processes. How do you get that to go when you go back to the operating areas, the BUs, or however you define that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think a lot of that goes back to the process. So, my team, the thing that gets people's hackles up, I think, whenever you're making a change is, one, everyone looks at it and says, oh man, they've got their fingers on my pudding, right? Like, this is my process. I own it. Stay away. The second thing is there's fear of trying to come over and take things over. Well, it's great. My agenda, I don't want to own anything long-term, right? If it's working, that I'm not interested in it. I only want the broken stuff. And, the way that we operate is we're able to say, okay, let's step in, let's partner with who ultimately does or will own this process. And we want them to own it. We want them to not just be at the table, but helping to drive those guiding principles, helping to design it, helping to take that leadership the whole way. At the end of the day, they're the ones who I want up on the screen at the town hall, getting recognition or at an executive briefing. They're the ones who should get the credit. We're just here to help disrupt. We're here to help push it through, to de-risk, to help handle something that's really complicated, because there's always some reason a process was bad, right? No one at the bank is trying to make something cumbersome. Everyone has that same objective. It's just there's some hurdle that was placed in the way that makes it tough. So, my job is to help other people succeed.
Well, congratulations. It seems like you've put together a really robust program to drive all the kinds of things that we hope, I think, when we try to set up these CX programs that we're able to impact. And it sounds like you've got really figured out part of the secret. Now that you've sort of gotten 5 years under your belt, how do you move this forward? What do you see in the future, or where are your priorities right now?
Well, it's funny you mentioned Agile in the beginning. Probably the biggest thing that we're working on right now is actually moving to a more Agile operating methodology across the bank, and especially in my line of business. So the big shift we're working on right now is, how do we integrate my team into all the different programs and design the business so that client feedback is just so integrated into the way that we operate and is driving all of the different product development life cycle and everything else that's going on at the bank, that we're just tied into every single program as we work across and act kind of as a chapter in this bigger picture. So that's what we're doing. We're building ourselves into the fabric of the bank.
Well, I did not know that when I made the comment, but just your description of sort of your approach to your work seemed very consistent with Agile. And I think it's a great model for CX pros. If you're not familiar, you can Google this. You can find a lot of good stuff on Agile, but it's really a collaborative, iterative, kind of put stuff out there, co-create with the other people, right? Is that a fair description?
Oh, absolutely. And I think it drives a lot of the behaviors that we're trying to drive every day.
Yeah. And I think, particularly for CX pros, a lot of times we don't get the business owners to seek us out as often as we would like to. But, if we're out there delivering value and really demonstrating that we understand what the operating manager or the frontline people are trying to do, over time, we can demonstrate that. So again, congratulations for a great program you put together.
Well, I mean, it's certainly not just me, right? I've got an amazing team, and then even the extended team, that don't fit in a hierarchy or a reporting structure. the bank and the leadership is all focused on delivering this exceptional experience for the client. And that's a cultural thing.
Yeah. It sounds like you had the top buy-in right off the bat, which we always talk about in this program. If it's not impossible to do the change if you don't have it, but it sure is a lot easier if you've got it from the top to start, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I can't take credit for that. I walked into leadership that wanted to invest and believed in this.
Yeah. And I think like a lot of initiatives in the organization, if the leaders really are role modeling not just the values or putting the values out there, but they're actually demonstrating through their actions that they buy into it, it just makes it a heck of a lot easier. So that's always a nice factor to have in your program. Andy, it sounds like you haven't done anything wrong, but I got to believe in 5 years you might have at one time found something that tricked you up, or someplace where you learned or you didn't hit it right out of the park right to start. So any kind of lessons learned there or anything you'd want to share about that?
Oh, for sure. Plenty of those. And like I said before, failure is such a great teacher. And, certainly we've got our share of good teachers in our past. We had this grand vision, or I should say I had this grand vision of creating a all-knowing chatbot for our internal teams that I was calling Jarvis. And, I set the bar really high right off the bat, the computer that talks to Tony Stark, right? That's what we were going to build. Well, the idea was this was going to be a one-stop shop. You can ask it any question as an employee, and it's going to point you to the right answer. Well, when we started to build this thing, the first thing that we learned quickly was the back-end infrastructure, all the answers you need for these questions, they're not out there. The information's outdated. It's not easy. The second thing we learned is the questions people can't answer are really complicated. There is no quick reference guide you can build. It's so client specific. It's a very, very tough thing to answer these questions. In fact, people have been here 20, 30 years. It's their brains that you need to tap into to be able to answer these questions. So at the end of the day, my team identified this really early and pushed me and said, "Guys, this just isn't going to work. We got to take a different approach." But I loved this idea. I had a cool code name for it. I knew exactly how to tell this story inside the organization. So I kept pushing. Guys, we can figure this out. Let's not abandon this. Let's figure out how we can do this. Planning session after planning session, idea after idea. Well, eventually, my head of innovation pulled me aside and goes, "Andy, we got to drop it." And so I probably wasted time over the course of 6 months that really could have been spent on doing some better things. But I had a dream, and we just weren't ready for it yet.
Yeah. No, that's a great story. I really appreciate you sharing that. And, it's very consistent with the Agile approach is you fail fast, and you really try to incorporate those learnings going forward. So again, thanks for sharing that. Andy Netzel, it is now time where I ask every guest on the CX Leader podcast for their best tip. We call it take-home value, but the concept here is that you leave our listener with an idea that they could implement pretty quickly at their own program based on kind of what you've shared today, and make a little improvement for their own CX efforts. So Andy Netzel of KeyBank, what's your take-home value for this podcast?
Sure. Well, I'll focus on the latter part of the podcast name, the leader part versus the front part, CX. I like to try and lead with a career focus on my team. So as we start doing goal planning for the year, one thing that I always ask is, at the end of this year, what's going to be the resume bullets that we're adding for you? What are those big successes that you're going to be able to boast about at the end of the year? And I think sometimes framing projects in terms of personal success, it's a great way to motivate great results. So taking a step back and saying, okay, so hold on, this is what the resume bullet sounds like. That I would want to bulk that up. What's the stat? What's the KPI? How do we make that even more impressive? And then how do we design the project to make sure we land that? The other nice byproduct of that is it makes it really easy for me to argue for a bigger raise or a promotion for my teammates.
That's a great tip. Thanks. I might take that one too. So I always learn something on the podcast, and today I learned about that and pre-mortems. Hey, my guest on the podcast this week's been Andy Netzel. He's a CCXP and also the head of the Performance Innovation Lab at KeyBank. Andy, thanks for being such a great guest on the CX Leader podcast. Really appreciated having you on.
Hey, it was fun, Steve.
Hey, and if anybody wanted to continue the conversation, I think I found you on LinkedIn, right? You're on out on LinkedIn, aren't you?
Sure thing.
Yeah, Andy Netzel, Netzel, and when people are tuned into the podcast, they'll see your name. And we always like to try to expand the community. So thanks again for being such a great guest on the podcast. Hope you'll come back again sometime.
Anytime.
Hey, and if you want to talk about anything you heard on this podcast or about how Walker can help your business's customer experience, feel free to email me at podcast@walkerinfo.com. Remember to give the CX Leader podcast a rating through your podcast service and give us a review. Your feedback will help us improve the show and deliver the best possible value to you, our listener. Check out our website, cxleaderpodcast.com, to subscribe to the show and find all of our previous episodes, podcast series, contact information. You can drop us a note, let us know how we're doing, give us an idea for a future podcast. The CX Leader podcast is a production of Walker. We're an experience management firm that helps companies accelerate their XM success. You can read more about us at walkerinfo.com. Thank you for listening, and remember, it's a great time to be a CX leader. So go out there and keep working on that part of the iceberg that nobody can see, and we'll see you again next time.